Welcome to episode number 3 of the Road to Cinema podcast, featuring AD and producer Tim Zinnemann. As an AD, Mr. Zinnemann has worked with such directors as Billy Wilder, Mike Nichols, Mark Rydell, Peter Yates, John Schlesinger, and Bob Rafelson. As a producer, he worked with Dustin Hoffman on Straight Time and was instrumental in bringing Kevin Costner to the screen in his first leading role in the film Fandango. We also discussed Mr. Zinnemann's involvement in one of the most famous car chase scenes in all of cinema history. That's Steve McQueen chasing down a criminal through the streets of San Francisco in Bullitt. For more information on the Road to Cinema podcast, to take a look at our Road to Cinema blog, and to learn more about our Road to Cinema web series on YouTube, please visit jogroadproductions.com or Jog Road Productions on YouTube, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter for the latest updates at Jog Road. Now we join our conversation with Tim Zinnemann as he discusses his father, Oscar-winning director Fred Zinnemann.
So, as a child growing up, he kept me far away from the set, and my only experience of any kind was that at 14 I was an extra on Oklahoma, so I got paid to ride a horse for a summer, and that was about it. So he wanted me to become a doctor or something else, as did his father before him. So he had the same kind of fight with his own dad in the 20s. So.
Did you express a lot of interest with him about going into film?
No, actually, I didn't, because I didn't particularly have any, and I wanted to be a photographer, which is really what I wanted to do. And he told me, well, photography's great as a hobby, but it's not a career, was what he said. And just go to college and get an education.
Yeah. What did you study at Columbia?
Well, actually, I went to Kenyon more. I just went to Columbia for a semester and quit. But I went to Kenyon College, and it was a liberal arts education, mostly philosophy, which I really detested in the end. So I sort of got into movies through the theater I was able to get a job as an apprentice at the Westport Playhouse on what was called the Straw Circuit, where they would try out plays for Broadway. They'd take a number of 10 or 15 apprentices every summer, and that's where I really first knew that I would be interested in entertainment in some form. So.
What type of things did you do at West? Were you stage manager, or did you...
Well, it was a professional theater. It was a 1,000-seat theater, and every week they'd rotate you with one department or another, whether it was working the parking lot or with the electrician or whatever, And the best job was being assistant stage manager.
Right.
So, and they also, you had to do bit parts as an actor, which I had to also do, which I detested. Did
you eventually work as an assistant editor in Rome, or was that a while later?
I mean, that's what happened. I guess when I was going to Columbia, and I was really sort of had lost I just had lost it. I wasn't interested in college, and I started doing the models' portfolios, and through that I got a chance to be an assistant for Abaddon. And the same day that happened, I got a call from my father's film editor on Nun's Story, who said he was going to Rome to do a picture, and if I wanted to come and live in his house and work as an apprentice for the summer, I could do it. Wow. So I leaped at the opportunity, basically. And at the end of the summer, basically all I did all summer was what they called hot splicing film, which is what you did in those days. And another American picture was coming in at the time, and they wanted an experienced assistant film editor who knew the American system and who was bilingual. And so I raised my hand, and I didn't speak a word of Italian, and I certainly wasn't much of an assistant at that point. So I got the job and met a girl, learned Italian, got trained by a very nice film editor who sort of overlooked my flaws and sort of taught me what to do. And then so I wound up staying there for 4 years. And it was a time where there was a lot of money that was from Hollywood that was stuck in Europe, and they basically had to make movies in Europe or pay taxes on all this money that they had over there. So it was a period where there was what they called runaway productions, a lot in Italy and some later in Spain. And so the studios were using all their money for foreign productions. So I was able to have a very nice career over there. And I got on to, I think it was 1963, I was hired to do the Pink Panther, and through Blake Edwards and the Ralph Winters, they agreed to bring me back to Hollywood to finish the picture. And I think Blake had gotten a waiver for me from the Guild, the editors union, and when I got back here they reneged, and they said I could finish the picture but I couldn't get in. And I guess apparently he got kind of furious that this had happened, and through him and my father and others I got into the Directors Guild, not knowing what an assistant director did or cared, nor did I care, but I became an assistant director that way, not out of choice, but just it's what happened to me. So, and I mean, I was very lucky. I mean, I don't think I appreciated it at the time, and I was hired to work for the Mirisch Company, which was sort of the AAA leagues of those days.
A lot of Billy Wilder movies and
yeah, I mean it was something like
Pink Panther as well.
They did the Pink. That's how what my entree was. But I mean, yes, it was all the Billy Wilder and Robert Wise, Sound of Music, West Side Story. So there was a ton of wonderful filmmakers working, and I was very lucky to be able to work for that company and for those people.
And was Kiss Me Stupid the first production that you had worked on?
No, there was actually one before that John Sturgis directed, called a memorable picture called The Satan Bug with George Maharis and somebody else. Or Richard Basehart was the mad scientist who was spreading botulism throughout the world. And my first assignment as a second assistant was we were shooting on a golf course, and the first shot was a helicopter shot of all these dead golfers lying all over the place. And I was told that there were some old guys playing golf, I don't know, hole number 9 or something. So I was told, go tell those guys to duck behind a tree, we're going to shoot. So I went over to say, excuse me, sir, but we're making a movie and all this. And they said, we don't give a goddamn. And, get out, you're ruining our game, and, screw you. And so we had to wait for them to play 9 holes of golf with the whole crew watching them. And because of me, so that was my first sort of assignment that I blew as a second. But anyway, go ahead and ask whatever.
Well, what did you see as some of the essential tools that you needed to learn to really be a great assistant director at the beginning?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, you're a gopher and you're just doing what you're told. So I worked a lot for, at the time, a really good first assistant, luckily, who had done The Great Escape, among other pictures, and worked with Steve McQueen a lot, and so I learned a lot from him. I mean, basically you're like a soldier standing at attention right next to the guy who tells you to go do this or go do that, and go do what it is you're told to do, pretty much. And I think a lot of it has to do with being to thinking ahead of what's going to happen next, and to learn to be very logical about things, and as the first AD is to have an A plan, a B plan, and a C plan, and be totally prepared, but also be prepared for chaos, and to be able to have a solution for the chaos, So that's, but I mean, you learn it over time. You certainly don't learn it in a day, and a lot of it has to do, as an assistant, with your relationships with the director, the cameraman, earning the respect of the crew. So you basically have to know what everybody's job is, and being able to deal with feisty actors, and in a diplomatic way. So there's a lot of moving parts to being a good assistant, I'd say.
Did you see at a certain point, working with so many directors, that each one had their own particular style of breaking down a script and how they really saw everything being executed and how they worked with their ADs? Sure.
Well, I mean, actually, the first assistant's the one that breaks the script down, and so when you're hired initially, you are the one that puts it all together, and you're told usually that we want to do this in 9 weeks or 12 weeks, or we only have this much money, so you have to bear those kind of things in mind. But so you sort of lay it out for the director, who says, "Oh, I want to shoot in continuity," or "I don't care." Some are much more practical than others. Some want to shoot everything in continuity. Just depends on the person,
Yeah.
I mean, I had an opportunity as a first to work with a lot of really talented, interesting guys like Mark Rydell and Mike Nichols, and Peter Yates was just coming off of his first picture to do Bullitt. So I mean, I had a chance to work with a lot of really...
Bullitt seems like a really incredible movie to organize, in terms of, you have the famous car chase sequence, of course, in the streets of San Francisco, and so many locations, and so many big action sequences. But for something like the car chase sequence, how do you even begin to organize that with the crew and the city? And
what happened with the car chase scene, it was all laid out by a guy named Kerry Lofton, who did, among many other things, Mad World. And so he had sort of laid it all out. And then we had a big meeting, and he was showing the director and McQueen and me and everybody what it was. And then I think it was mostly McQueen just said, "This is crap," and threw it out and just said, "This is ridiculous. I don't want to do this kind of a thing." It was like screeching into an alley and bursting through a bunch of boxes and that kind of stuff. Sort of typical stuntman things. So what happened is that we would meet every morning in the parking lot of the Grace Cathedral, so the company would be there. And McQueen took quite an active role in the creation of the chase, actually. And so we would do one stunt in the morning and one stunt in the afternoon. And, we figure out, okay, we're going to why don't we have the cars jump down the hill? That'll be fun. So we'd go scout it out and then place the cameras wherever. And then it was my job to basically lock it off. So at one point there was 60 blocks locked off on a Tuesday noon.
At one time there were 60 blocks. Wow, that's incredible.
And well, I mean, who knows, locked off. It was, it meant that I had the entire crew holding streets, so it was just civilians saying, "Just a minute, please, we're going to fly down this hill and you better be careful." So, I mean, anything could have happened at any time, but luckily nothing ever did. So.
Was it planned out shot by shot, like a very extensive shot list?
No, I mean, what happened with that particular movie was there was a script that was essentially thrown out on day one, and we had a guy named Harry Kleiner hired as a writer to come in, and he was on the set, and he'd go write a scene, or we'd say, hey, Harry, how about we do something in the kitchen here, to come up with something. So he'd go running up and write something, saying, here, I got this. And that's kind of how the whole movie was done. It was winged.
Wow.
And people's parts got bigger, smaller. Like Bob Duvall was supposed to have a supporting role in the thing, and he played a cab driver, and so he wound up playing a lot of tennis and never working, or working just a few days because his part got cut, basically.
Is that difficult to make a schedule when the script is so up in the air in terms of what you're shooting day to day?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to be fast on your feet. And I mean, we'd work 6 days a week and scout on the 7th day, and we had access to any place in the city we wanted, and we were able to use the personnel in the movie. Like, say we were shooting in a morgue, we'd use the morgue attendants, or same in the hospital, or wherever we were, we just used real people. So we had that opportunity. And in the beginning, we weren't going to ever have a set, which we never did. So it was all actual locations.
Nothing was ever built, and
nothing. And there were no special effects. I mean, other than real effects that you did, we did at the time, but other than to slow the camera down or speed it up, there was nothing, no tricks.
Yeah.
So.
I was going to ask earlier, did McQueen do any driving during the shooting of that sequence, or was it partially stunt driver?
No, it was all the hairy stuff was stunt drivers, mainly because he wanted to do more, but the studio refused to let him because of the risk to him and us. And so he did do, wherever there was sort of what we call a money shot, where we could design a shot where he'd go by in a close-up or something and show his prowess, we do that. And he was also deaf in one ear. And one time we were going to do such a shot where he came screeching around a corner past camera and off, and he was getting all revved up, and so he went back to the starting place, and I said, we're still setting up cameras, you're going to have to wait. And he says, that's okay, I'll wait. And then he heard something on the radio, and he said, did you say go? And I said no, I didn't say go, because he was deaf and he couldn't hear. And so he's all of a sudden, here he comes, like coming 90 miles an hour around the corner, and there's a camera assistant that was setting up the camera in the street, and I wasn't completely set up. And he saw McQueen coming, barreling down, and then he flicked on the camera and jumped, and McQueen came by and hit the camera, obliterated the camera, and kept going. And that shot's in the movie. You see it. There's a shot where he's coming right at camera and it goes black, and that's the shot. So I mean.
Oh, so the film survived, even though the camera was...
Yeah, the magazine made it, so we got the shot. I mean, the editor used the shot, so up to the last frame. So.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of winging it, and so it taught me. I mean, that was I couldn't have had a better training for myself. I was the first AD in 27 years old, so I was like one of the youngest people to ever do the job, and here I am on this 8 pictures. I mean, I was learning every day as I went. So.
When I spoke to Hawk Koch, he was telling me during the 1960s, 1970s, there weren't really production assistants on a set. No. It was mostly just the ADs.
That's it. Oh, there was a lot less staff than there is now. I mean, now there's 15 producers, and everybody's got a radio and running around, bumping into each other. And if you want to get to the 70s, I'll jump to that.
But I was wondering, do you see that as a positive or negative, how the crew of a film has gotten bigger over time? Negative?
Because, especially in the 70s, you know about BBS and all of that.
Yeah, Columbia.
Well, yeah, Bert Schneider was the son of Abe Schneider, who was the head of Columbia, but they were the ones that did Easy Rider, and he was sort of the gourmet version of Roger Corman. I mean, he did these tasty little movies for $1 million, and then
like Last Picture Show and
yeah,
Five Easy Pieces.
Yeah, and then I did one with them called The King of Marvin Gardens with Nicholson and Ellen Burstyn. But anyway, those were all done on a shoestring budget, and basically we'd have one or two trucks and a bus, and like Jack on that. And we were in Atlantic City, and I mean Nicholson would dress himself in his room, make sure he had all his props, and jump on the bus with us, and that's how we worked. And
so you didn't have a wardrobe person or a prop master?
Well, we did, but they'd say, "Here's your clothes, put them on in the morning." And we didn't have a honey wagon, we didn't have trailers, we didn't have any of that, and it was all fun. It was great. I mean, it was perfectly fine. And like I think it was Kovacs was a cameraman.
Oh, Laszlo Kovacs. Yeah.
And so, but everybody moved like lightning, and it looked great, and it all worked fine. So I think the bigger it gets, the more problems you're going to have, because you have more people with more egos, and if somebody has a trailer that's 40 feet long, there's going to be another actor that wants that's 42 feet long, so you start running into all of these kind of problems.
Yeah. I guess without naming names, but what are sort of some of the problems that you may have with actors, as all the films you've worked with, that sort of come up that are sort of unexpected? Or
well, some of them go nuts on you in the middle of the day. I mean, literally. Some are very unpredictable. Some are just workhorses. It's hard to say. There's no sort of norm. I mean, sometimes there's legitimate reasons when somebody gets sick, or unforeseen events happen. Somebody gets hurt on the set. There's tons of things. But I mean, I've had my share of people who just didn't want to show up and stuff. I've been on movies where actors wouldn't come out of the trailer, and I had to go sue them and say, it's all right, you can, you are getting $5 million for 2 weeks, maybe you can grace us with your presence, So I'd have to, it's like being a psychiatrist, really. It's
do they sometimes go to the AD more, do they go to the AD first, sort of over the director? Like if an actor has a problem, have you seen that?
It's just like a family. It just depends on the relationship. I worked on one movie where the director wouldn't talk to one of the stars and says, tell him this, tell him that. And so I had the relationship with the actor, and the director didn't. It's just all different permutations.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the main thing of being good at being an AD is being able to think ahead and to keep everybody flowing and moving forward, so you get the best out of each day's work.
Yeah. Do you ever prefer your director to have a shot list going into the shoot, or does that matter to you at all in terms of organization for the day?
Well, because a lot of them have one that they don't follow, and then after the first shot, they throw it out the window. So, I mean, it's nice to have. I mean, there's people that have shot lists that have come in with storyboards and then don't follow the storyboards, and other people that are slavishly trying to follow a storyboard that isn't going to work and spend too much time trying to make it work. So it just really depends on the person,
Well, favorite film of mine is Carnal Knowledge, which was directed by Mike Nichols.
Yeah.
What was it like working with Mike Nichols, and how was that production?
Well, I think he's a terrific talent, a very nice guy, and I felt very privileged to be the first on that picture. So I felt it was a real honor to work with him. He's demanding in a very kind of quiet way, but I mean, he likes everything to be like the theater, where he has complete control, and nobody is anywhere basically, and he just wants to be him and his actors, and that he can't stand noise, and at least in that instance anyway. And so we were shooting for months on a soundstage in Vancouver, in that kind of way. And I will tell a slightly amusing story here. But Joe Levine was the producer or the financier, and so we were running way over schedule, way over budget. It's just going on and on and on the simple, it's a simple location thing. And what we used to do, we were shooting French hours, which I don't know if you know what that is. It's when you shoot 8 straight hours without a break and everybody goes home. So you don't stop for a meal. So we were shooting French hours, but with Nichols, he wanted to have a bit of a break, so we'd have a 2-hour lunch in the middle of this French hours. So, and then he'd show the crew what he wanted, and they light it and do whatever. Then everybody get kicked out while they rehearsed. And then so all the crew had places where they would go and do things, either basketball or playing chess or cards or whatever. And so there was this long corridor where all the crew would sort of hang out, waiting to be called back in. And
so the set was very private, just the actors.
It was
and
just
the director.
like it was me and Peppino Rotuno, the cameraman, and the mic guy, and that would be it in the script. So we kept going over schedule, over budget. So Joe Levine decided he was going to put his foot down and come on the set and confront Nichols and say, hey, what is this, basically. So the day he flew in with his entourage, and he was going to be coming to the set, and we were rehearsing, and all the crew was kicked out, and it was just me and Nichols and the actors and so forth. So Levine walks down the hall with all the people playing chess and basketball and everything like that, and having a great time. Goes into the set, and the door opens, and here he is with his entourage way at the other end. It's all black. He's trying to find his way around it. Nichols says to me, he says, go tell him he can't be here, it's a closed set. And I said, well, it's Joe Levine. He says, I don't care, just tell him it's a closed set and to leave. So I had to walk the whole length of this black, lonely thing to go tell Joe Levine, sorry, sir, but this is a closed set. And so I said that, and he says, I don't think you understand, I'm Joe Levine. And I said, well, I'm sorry, it's a closed set. What can I tell you? And then he looked past me over to Nichols, who was way in the back, and then Nichols was like, what can I do? He's in charge, meaning me, so I just work here kind of thing. So that's kind of how Nichols was. Then I did have a chance to work with him again as a production manager on Day of the Dolphin too.
So that's sort of an interesting style that he worked in, where he would rehearse for a long period of time and then shoot the scene. Yeah. It is very theatrical in terms of, he came from a theater background. So was that like a very unusual setup to really...
for him?
Or just in general, to like rehearse for so many hours and then...
Well, it's very luxurious. Nobody really that I knew of could afford to do such a thing. Like Billy Wilder on Kiss Me Stupid, he had his film editor on the set and his diamond on the set as partner, and then he wouldn't start before 9 o'clock, so he would show up at 8:30, and in his chair had to be the coffee and the 2 trades, and he'd read the trades, and then he'd drink his coffee, and then nobody could talk to him. And then at 9 he says, okay, I'm ready to start, and he'd bring the actors in, and again he would rehearse for say 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours. So up until like 10:45 we'd be rehearsing, and it would always be these very complicated shots. It would be like 5 pages of dialogue and moving here and moving there, and then so he'd give it to the cameraman. He says, "You got it, Joe?" And he says, "Yeah, I got it." And he says, "How long do you think?" And he'd say, "Oh, 3 hours." He said, "Okay." And then he'd go to Beverly Hills for lunch. But he would always, he would design the shot, so time it so that the rehearsal would, there was no way to shoot the shot before lunch, basically. So he could go, so he'd go off and have a fancy lunch and say, "You know, what time do you want me back, Joe?" And he'd say, "Oh, 3." And then, so he'd come back at 3 and we'd shoot the scene, and he'd say, "All right, I might need a close-up, so give me a bit for where she's over at the closet, and that'll be it." You know, and we would have shot 5 pages that was brilliantly done, and no pain, no strain. So everybody works differently, you know. I know
exactly.
George Stevens would shoot 12 versions of the same scene, so it was very laborious. It was just the opposite. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. As an AD, do you feel that you're more in service to the director or the producer?
Well, definitely the director.
Yeah.
For sure. But I mean, a lot of times you'd be caught in the middle where the producer would say, you know, let's get him, push the director, do this, and you try to balance it out. But if there was an issue of loyalty, it was always to the director, I'd say.
Yeah. Another really interesting film is Day of the Locust, and 2 sort of really interesting scenes in that film. One is on the soundstage when that giant set collapses.
Yeah.
And then the last scene of the film, the movie premiere on Hollywood Boulevard, where Donald Sutherland stomps on the little boy, and that chaos breaks out, and it becomes this sort of surreal fantasy. So those 2 scenes, what were those like to organize? They seem very, a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, my forte as an assistant was background action, I guess you could say, or I became known for that. And so with the latter one, I remember he was no good at that stuff. So I remember him rehearsing the actors.
Oh, John Schlesinger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were doing the scene, the Grauman's scene, or he rehearsed the actors, and he said to me after the race, he says, "Okay, right, organize me a riot. I'm going to be in my dressing room." and that's what, for like 2 days, that's like what I did, you know. So I organized the whole thing and then showed it to him 2 days later, and that's what we shot. In terms of the mountain, what was actually, I don't know how funny this is, but anyway, what happened in the film, the mountain collapses. There's a big geschrei and everybody gets hurt, and the studio guys come in and say, "How long is it going to be before we get back up on our feet?" All that stuff. So we went to shoot this thing, and all the stuntmen go running up, and the set's pre-rigged to collapse. It does. It hurts all the stuntmen, just like in the movie, and they're all going, "Ow, ow." And we had like 12 ambulances come to haul people away, and the production manager for Paramount came over and says, "Oh, you know, how long is this going to set us back?" So it mirrored the scene in the movie. I mean, it was actually kind of funny.
What are the challenges of having so many background extras that you have to coordinate, especially in like that end premiere scene in the movie?
Well, I don't think for me it wasn't a challenge, because I think you can't have too many voices telling people what to do. So I would take charge and be the one telling them what to do, and part of it started by getting them all together and sort of just talking to them like humans, and rather than say you go here and run over there and fall down. I mean, I explain the context of what we were doing, and give them some background so that they could individually figure some of it out for themselves. And then I would strategically place certain people where there was going to be key action, and then it's sort of like building a set or something. I don't know. Yeah. It wasn't hard for me after a while because I was so used to it, doing it.
Was that all shot on location? The Chinese theater?
No, it was the sound stage. We had a big sound stage and we built the whole thing.
Oh, the whole exterior of the theater. Wow.
And then it was inside, and we had problems with the cars idling, so we had to have the doors open and stuff.
That must have been like a massive set. I mean, you can see it in the film.
It was 2 or 3 sound stages with the doors opened up.
Wow. And also in that scene, there's a lot of like heavy violence. Is that difficult to coordinate as well? Just in terms of people like pushing each other out of the way and.
Not really, no. I mean, it's if you're doing a tighter shot, then it's a very controlled thing, and the stunt guy comes in and does a lot of it.
Yeah.
No, it's not a problem.
And then another favorite of mine, which I believe you line produced, was Straight Time with Dustin Hoffman.
Right.
So were you any part of a creative producer on that, or were you sort of?
I was, but I mean, I was a producer. I don't ever know what this line thing means. I mean, I know they call people that, but I was hired by him to be the producer when he was let's face it, the producer, because it was through First Artists, which was his company, so he had complete control of the situation. And when I started, he was going to direct and star in it. And I was hired by him to sort of just take him through the process and be by his side and, advise him on what to do. I mean, so he basically fired himself as a director after trying to do 3 days up in Folsom Prison. So he realized it was too big a task for him to do both jobs, and correctly decided to step away from doing it and brought in Ulu. We brought in Ulu Grosspart, who had been a mentor of his when he was a stage manager in New York.
Yeah. He directed a lot of theater productions, I believe, too, right?
He's dead now, poor guy. Nice guy, very nice. So we tried to get Sidney Pollack, and Sidney didn't want to do it, so we got Ulu.
Yeah, and I believe on that film, the actual inspiration, the character that Dustin Hoffman was playing, he was sort of like he was an advisor on the film. He was kind of a career,
Eddie Bunker.
Edward Bunker. He's
Yeah,
kind of a career criminal.
Well, I first talked to Eddie when he was still in jail. He did the book called No Beast So Fierce, which became Straight Time. So he was an advisor on the movie, and he was an actor in the movie. And he became a friend of mine after that. And but he went on. From then on, he wasn't a criminal anymore either. So he served his time, and that was the end of it for him. But I mean, he wrote a bunch of books about the life of a criminal and stuff, mostly autobiographical stuff.
And what was interesting on that film, there was the bank robbery scene, and also a lot of scenes that were sort of in a prison. Did you shoot in real prisons for most of it?
Yeah, we were in. I think in pre-production, I went up with this female writer. What's her name? I can't remember her name. To Quentin for the day, and so again, for whatever reason, they let us have the run of the place. So they locked us in Quentin on death row, and the death row inmates were our guests, or treating us as their guest for the day. And it was Nancy Dowd was her name, the writer. And the one thing they had said to us, under no circumstances wear blue jeans, because we won't be able to distinguish you from the prisoners. Don't do that. So of course she did. She went around all day, the only woman in this place dressed in blue jeans. So to answer your question, yes, we shot in Folsom, I think, and some other. And we shot at various county jails too, as I remember.
Wow. And I believe the bank robbery scene was actually in a real bank. Is that true? Was that logistically a little difficult to actually close a bank down at all?
No, if you have their cooperation, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
But, a lot of times you just have to work out a schedule where you're not in their way, and we do it after they closed, their business. So, we just worked when it was okay for them. But going back to Bullitt, we were on every kind of location you could be, from the emergency room of the hospital to God knows what. And we never had, the only time I ever had a problem was at the Mark Hopkins Hotel, where I asked some guests if they'd mind staying in the elevator while I got the shot. And again, they said, screw you, we're lost. That was the only time I ever had a problem. But most of these places, as long as you work it out up front and you're clear about what you're going to do, it's okay,
Yeah. And did you ever sort of plan on making a transition from being an AD to a producer, or did that just sort of happen?
In that case, I
naturally?
Did plan it.
Yeah.
I was an AD for about 6 or 7 years, and then I became a production manager, which I knew I didn't want to die as one. I wanted to keep going into some other thing. So, but I was a production manager, and at a certain point, I just said, "It's enough. I'm through with this, and I'm going to either be a producer or get out of the business." So, and then Dustin's picture was the first time I was hired as a producer. So, because initially he wanted me to be the production manager, and I said no, I wouldn't do that. And I also turned down Apocalypse Now at the same time as a production manager. So, so on straight time I made the transition.
And then you also produced, I believe it was Michael Mann's first directing for a feature for television, Jericho Mile.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in that project? And
I met Michael independently through a mutual friend who was a producer at TV, and he was just starting out in Hollywood, and I think he was writing for Starsky and Hutch, and he was looking to get into features, and I met him as a writer wanting to write features, and so it was on Straight Time, and I got him a job to do a rewrite on Straight Time. So that's how I met him. He did while we were shooting, he did a rewrite, and then he got the chance to do Jericho Mile, and then he asked me if I'd produce it, so I did. And in fact, he asked me when I was in Bora Bora for 8 months on this weird picture, and I got a call from him that would I go to Folsom Prison and do this. And so I went from Bora Bora to Folsom Prison from one day to the next.
Yeah, it was all two prison type films in a row, Jericho Mile and Straight Time.
And then I did a third one that never got made that I was developing myself, and I basically I have been to every prison on the West Coast at this point. And when I was going around doing research for this one thing, I'd walk into one place and the inmates say, "Hey Tim, how's it going? Have you seen so-and-so?" And I'd get phone calls from these guys, like a collect call from so-and-so from Folsom. "Hey, how's it going?" they talked to me for hours. So I got to know all the convicts.
When you became a creative producer, did you still like to have a hand in the actual physical production of a film, or did you ever delegate out?
Well, I would have been happy, but I mean, that's how I'd get things made, as I had to. Like Hawk Koch, I can't call him Hawk, he's Howard. But we had similar career paths, basically. So, I mean, basically we both learned practically how to make movies, so that's something that studios would kind of insist that we continue to do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, Jerry Bruckheimer is another one that is a good working knowledge of the day-to-day operation. So
he produced a film that I think you were an AD on. It was
Farewell, My
Lovely.
I was the production manager.
Manager.
Yeah, that's I first met him there. So he'd just come out from New York, I think.
Yeah, I believe that was it was like a Philip Marlowe detective.
Yeah.
Sort of adaptation. Robert Mitchum.
Right. Exactly.
In there.
Yeah, that was another example. It was in the early '70s, and there was no work in town, so we had like probably the best crew you could humanly put together, and we didn't have a lot of money to make it, so it was all, had to do it with spit and glue, and Dean Tavaleris was a production designer, who's, to my mind, one of the most brilliant.
Did a lot of Coppola's movies. Yeah,
I mean, he's just beyond brilliant, I think. And so he, again, we'd have to find these 30s places and fix them up with a little of paint and a little of this and that. And he found everything. It was just amazing.
What was Robert Mitchum like to work with back then?
He's, funny, weird. I mean, I knew him from growing up. His kids went to my school, and I kind of knew him that way. But I did 2 or 3 movies with him, I think. But he was fine.
And then there was a movie that you did with, I believe it was one of Kevin Costner's first leading roles, Fandango.
I did? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Kevin Reynolds wrote and directed that.
Yeah, I mean, a part of what it seemed to what happened to me is that I worked a lot with first-time directors. The first one being Michael Mann, Kevin Reynolds, Tim Hunter, different ones, and to be there to help them, guide them along the path, So
yeah.
That was Kevin's first feature for Spielberg's company, and I think I was the one that suggested Kevin for it, Costner, because up until that point, he'd been the guy that always came in for a reading to read with other actors, but would just be hired for the day, and would never get the part, and but I knew that he was a really talented guy, so I got him to come in for that. So.
Yeah. And so you've worked with so many first-time directors. Is there sort of any learning curve that you see common among all the first-time directors that you've worked with that you've sort of had to help them establish?
Well, I think a lot of them sort of have shoot the movie about 500 times in their head before they ever get to do it, and it becomes so rigidly fixed in their mind that if anything deviates from what they envision in their head, they kind of lose it, so they can't vamp. They don't know how to vamp or change gears or do things differently if something's not working, And I'd say that was kind of a common problem for most of them.
Sort of not being able to kind of compromise when things change.
Knowing how to, even if they wanted to, of not quite being able to figure out a B plan if the A plan doesn't work.
And then one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's early films, The Running Man, you would also produce. I believe that was from a Stephen King book.
Yeah. He had written under Richard Bachman, I think it was. But it was Actually, the Hunger Games was a lot like Running Man. The idea of the story, the original idea of the story was an everyman character who was a working class poor guy who was an everyman guy, and he had a very sick daughter with life-threatening disease, and he had no money, and he wanted to save his daughter's life, and so he went on this. He sacrificed himself to go on this game, and as he went along, he sort of gained popularity and strength, and everybody got behind him. So it really wasn't an Arnold Schwarzenegger type. It was just a little mousy guy from somewhere, that became a superhero. So it was a bit of a stretch to have Arnold play this. But
did that sort of develop based on Arnold Schwarzenegger's cachet at the time? To sort of,
I don't know. I think he had done some other pictures that made him a big star. I don't know that Running Man did. I don't think it did that well, actually, but it was kind of a mess making the thing. But we got through it, so.
And then one of John Frankenheimer's last films, The Island of Dr. Moreau, which I believe had Marlon Brando, Val Kilmer, sort of an interesting science fiction movie. What were sort of your experiences working on that?
What was the original director's name? Do you remember? David somebody.
Oh, so John Frankenheimer had replaced
the guy. But I'm blanking on his. I shouldn't be doing that. Anyway, I was just prior to that experience. How I got involved with that is I had stopped movies altogether, and I was working as a commercial photographer, and I got a panic call. Could I go to Thailand? This picture was running way over budget, and would I do it? And I said, all right. And that was a picture called Street Fighter, and for Pressman's Films. And so I wound up doing that and stopping my photography career. And even though I didn't want to get back in the business, I figured it would just be 10 weeks, but it wasn't. So anyway, I did this Street Fighter thing and finished it off, and got a relationship going with Pressman, I guess. And so that's how I got involved with Dr. Moreau. And again, it was Richard Stanley, that's the guy's name. So it was a young director named Richard Stanley who'd written the script and gotten Brando to be in it, and because of that, New Line came aboard, and at that point I got involved with Stanley. So there was like an 8-month prep time, and he was Richard was obviously but he was very nervous about working with Brando and get everything just right. So he would hole himself up with a sketch artist that he knew, and just literally for 8 months just do storyboards. And when he came to shooting, he basically froze, and he couldn't do it. And Kilmer didn't want to work with him and told me so. He said, I'm not going to work with this guy. So I mean, it just became this chaotic mess, and then so we had to, or New Line saw what he shot and said, okay, thanks, and next. And we found Frankenheimer, who was just getting back into the business again. And so Frankenheimer took over that picture and did the best that he could with it, which wasn't good enough, but he tried.
What was John Frankenheimer like to work with as a director? I mean, he has such a long filmography of amazing films.
I mean, I liked the guy. He's a kind of the old school, and no problem for me. Kind of from the Yeller Screamer school, but I mean, I got along fine with him. And some of the people, his crew didn't. They hated him, but because of that fact, and he sort of loudly insults people at lunch and say, "This is the worst crew I've ever seen." And, goddamn so and so. But so they didn't really like him. But
From what I've read, he was sort of always more into the actors on set and less with actual crew members.
He got sort of overly involved in mechanical things like crane dolly movements and which crane to use, and use this kind of a floating head and not that. So I'd say he'd get involved with everything pretty much.
And with Marlon Brando, legend has it he always sort of had an earpiece with lines being fed to him, and he would write like sort of cue cards on various things around the room. Was that the case in Dr. Moreau?
Yeah, well, I think in Godfather he started out, this may be myth, I don't know, I don't verify its accuracy, but what I heard at the time was that he would write his lines on the forehead of the other actor because he couldn't remember his lines, and the other actor got pissed off, said, "No, you can't do that," and so he had them taped to the ceiling, and that's why you'd always see him in the movie looking up like this.
There was a great on-set photo I found from The Godfather with Robert Duvall, had all the lines pasted on his body.
Yeah.
Ron Brando.
They got tired of that. But then they put it on the ceiling. But in the case of Moreau, it was more sophisticated. He had a ear thing, and he had his assistant, who used to be his girlfriend, I think Carolyn was her name, in his trailer, feeding him the lines. And so she would always feed him the lines. He'd say the lines, and that would be it. Then one time he stopped in the middle, and he says, "God damn it, Carolyn, I told you to stop acting." But that was his, I don't know why he did it that way, but that's what he did.
Did you have it in mind to sort of transition from film making to photography, or did that sort of...
It was the other way around. From the time I was 7, I wanted to be a photographer. Then my father sort of put the damper on that one. And it was just more, my whole career has really not been by design, it's just by, somebody calling me up and saying, "You want to go to Rome?" And I say, "Okay, sure, why not?" Remember somebody asked Buck Henry, "How do you write a script?" When he was giving a talk, and he said, "How do you write a screenplay?" And he said, "Well, the best way is first you think of a place that you'd like to go to that you've never been, and then you write about it." And I think that's kind of my approach to movies, was just try to work with the best people I could on interesting projects and go to nice places, like Folsom Prison.
What do you think has been the proudest moment of your career, or a particular project that you feel you're the most proud of?
Bullitt.
And
the reason is that part of it was I was very young, and the other reason was we were thinking on our feet, 7 days a week, and everybody was working as a team, and everybody was doing their absolute best and took great pride in what they were doing, and they were just, it was just a wonderful experience working with all these people together like that. It was just, and I think the end result was I was proud of that, what we did.
Yeah.
And I know how hard it was. I remember how hard it was. And there would be, we had a rigging crew, electrical crew that had 5 electrical trucks, and they would lay out, like one time at the airport, 5 miles of cable at night, and then they'd have to pick it all, wrap it at the end of the night. So we would shoot, and it was winter, so we'd start at 5 and finish at 6, and then they'd have to come in and wrap 5 miles of cable, and then do it again the next day, so that was the kind of effort that went into this. And the film speed was slow. It was like 100 ASA or ISO, whatever you want to call it.
So it required a lot of lighting to get an exposure.
Yeah, and then Fraker, the cameraman, we were shooting with Aeroflexes, and he got Nikon lenses that were f.8 lenses, so very fast lenses, but we still had 100 ASA film, which was considered fast in those days, but we had to have a lot of light. So but it was just the coordination of everybody working together and thinking on their feet. And it's like one time we were shooting the basement of the hospital, which went for miles, and we were chasing McQueen and somebody down this corridor, and we didn't have a lot of time, and we couldn't really lay the dolly track, and we didn't know, everybody's scratching their head, and the key grip went off somewhere and came back with a block of ice and put the camera on a hi-hat on the block of ice, and that was our dolly. And so we just slid, just like 2 grips running with the camera on a piece of ice, you know. It was that kind of invention that went on. So I'm very proud of that.
And probably one of the most famous car chases in all the movies. Bullitt.
Yeah, I think for its day, I'm sure it's been a lot better ones now, but I mean, in its day, it was as good as you could get. So.